Welcome to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, the podcast where we take questions I've been asked in the past from so many different roles, along with questions you'll ask and we'll ask together to, learn. Along the way, we'll build our capacity to become a community of problem solvers. I'm your host, Janice Case. Let's get to it, shall we? All right, welcome everybody to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case. This is our second episode that is a special episode under the COVID-19 umbrella, if you will. So I decided as the onset of the pandemic was kind of really hitting us, that when the topic came up, the opportunity arose, if I could do a quick episode in order to fill in some gaps around the work that we're doing in our homes, the lives that we're living with our families, etc., that could be helpful, that I would do that. And so as I came off of my interview last week with Michelle and Lisa, that hopefully folks have listened to, that was the beginning of our 4-part series on trauma. And we specifically talked about how parents could support kids who've experienced trauma. This coming Thursday, they're going to extend that conversation to educators. But in the meantime, I've had a couple of conversations with folks about right now in this moment, schools across the country are launching some form of distance learning, right? Everybody feels the pressure that we have to create learning environments for kids where they're moving forward with their academic growth between now and the end of the school year, especially as districts across the country announce that they're going to be closed for the rest of the school year. And we get that that is putting a lot of pressure on parents, and it is putting a lot of pressure on teachers, right? And district by district, we're all trying to figure out, like, what should be our focus? Should it be reviews? Should we try and do some new stuff? Where are we actually really trying to get them by the end of the year? And what's beautiful is that everybody's really working collaboratively to figure that out. But for now, one of the gaps that we see is that what kids really need right now, and frankly what their families need, is some really strong support in the arena of social emotional learning. And this ties in beautifully to the episode from last week, the episode you're going to hear later on this week. But I always appreciate that I have friends from all walks of life, from all of my different experiences. And so as I thought more about that and the opportunity to bring in a new voice, I thought of a school psychologist, well, once upon a time school psychologist who I worked closely with for years, who's just a wonderful person, Kalchthaler. And I reached out to her and said, Christine, I would love for you to come on and talk a little bit about what can teachers especially be doing as they launch distance learning and they're under the pressure to do whatever it is they've been told to do academically. And yet they know their kids need the social emotional piece. What can teachers do? How can they integrate the social emotional piece? How can we all be working collectively to just make sure kids are okay? And of course, Christine was gracious enough to join us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and ask Christine, to introduce yourself, give folks a little bit about your background, and then we're just going to jump right in.
Sounds great, Janice. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Christine Kalchthaler. I am a licensed school psychologist in Virginia. So I worked in our public school system, mostly at the secondary level, for about 10 years. And then I have had my own practice for the last 7 years. And I work mostly with middle and high school students. Therapeutically, I do a lot of work with anxiety, depression, perfectionism, ADHD, executive function coaching, and I also do a lot of assessment. So I have a number of opinions, and I am happy to share them.
And I love that about you, and you are going to share them. But I want to hone in on that. That's really critical. I want folks to expand their thinking, and I know teachers especially will, that as Christine said, her experience in schools and even now, and her private practice is primarily with middle and high schoolers, but certainly all that she talks about is going to be applicable to our elementary folks as well. But I also want to hone in on just hearing you say, I work with kids who are experiencing anxiety and depression and all these things. And I just think, oh my gosh, being a kid who's experiencing any one or multiples of those, just walking through life is hard. Now stick them in their home, right? Mm-hmm. Like in a whole different circumstance in the midst of something that's causing everybody anxiety, and say, function, right? Function. It's going to be, you can do it. Let's function. So let's start, Christine, with, I would say maybe some basic things you think anybody should be considering, any adult who's supporting a child, and then we can move into some specifics about teachers.
Sure. So what I really would love everybody to do is kind of look at this entire situation that we have all found ourselves in as an exercise in collective grief. What we are experiencing in kind of all levels, all of us, is a huge loss. We have lost a number of things. Our independence to a certain degree. We've lost our routines. We've lost, our social lives, our ability to interact with other people in a face-to-face way. And so what I really would like for everyone, parents, kids, and teachers, is to really kind of consider this as a grieving experience. And so when you're dealing with someone else, it doesn't matter if they're a colleague or a neighbor or a family member or a student or a child of your own, I want you to treat them like you would treat somebody who just suffered a profound loss. Because a lot of what we're going through collectively is a big grief experience. And so it's going to behave like when we lose a family member or when we lose a loved one. And God forbid, there are people who are actually going through that process as well. But the rest of us who are lucky enough to not, kind of be in a position where we have yet lost a family member to this, we're grieving as, in those same ways. Grief works the same way, no matter what you're grieving. Yeah. And so the same kind of care, compassion, and concern that you would give to someone who just lost a family member, a grandparent, a spouse, a child, is the way we need to be kind of approaching our kids. Okay. In this situation.
So what's really powerful about that expression of a collective experience of grief is really, really powerful. And what I'm thinking about it is that, normally, so to speak, an event happens, right? Someone died. I lost my job, whatever it is, that one thing happened. And so I go through a whole grieving cycle over that. But in this case, one thing happens and then the next thing happens, right? Like even back at the beginning, we wouldn't have envisioned that we would spend Easter alone. And for a lot of families, that means something really significant, right? Yes. It wasn't until a month in that most of us realized our seniors weren't going to get their graduation. So it's like, even as you're grieving one thing, the next thing comes or potentially could come, right?
100%. So grief operates in waves anyway, right? We all have, most of us have experienced some sort of kind of profound grief in our lives, at least as adults. And once you go through that process once, you realize that it comes in waves. But you make a very good point, Janice, that not only every little thing that we're grieving comes in waves, but the losses are coming in waves. And what I think it's really super important to kind of point out at this point is, I want adults to also be exercising that same compassion and care for themselves. Yes. Because at this point, we're asking parents to do all sorts of, things that we've never asked them to do before at home. And we're asking teachers to do all sorts of things that is, way out of most of our wheelhouses. And they're having to do that and have that kind of high level of functioning while still going through this same level of grieving that the kids are going through. So it is important to kind of acknowledge that in yourself. Yeah. And just to know, how is this impacting me today? Am I having an off day? Am I, is today not a great day for me? Yeah. Because those waves of the ups and downs and the ins and outs and the ebbs and flows of the grieving process is something that I think we as adults, it is really important for us to acknowledge how that's working for ourselves, and to take time away from responsibilities and pressures when we need to take care of ourselves.
And the hardest part, I think, is that we can't take care of each other in the ways that we normally do, right? I'm yes. thinking about the people outside my home, right? Mm-hmm. So that in and of itself presents some other challenges. And as you're talking, Christine, I'm thinking to myself, okay, we tend to be, and especially in education and especially as parents, we tend to be fine. right? I'm fine
Yeah.
because I have to be fine, right? Doesn't
Yeah.
matter what happened last night at home. When I go stand in front of a group of 30 kids in a classroom tomorrow, I'm fine. Um,
Yes.
and so we kind of have to give ourselves permission not to be fine, right? And find ways to I don't know, to not counter that, but to balance that. Like I'm finding that when because I'm finding that now that you're talking, if I'm thinking about myself, I'm minimizing things, right? Like, okay,
Yes.
my daughter's not going to have her college graduation, and that sucks. But we're all healthy, and we're all this, and we're all that, so we're going to
Yeah.
be okay. And we are going to be okay, but making sure I still give her permission to grieve
Yeah.
that in her own way, right? And to grieve it in my own way too, because we've been looking forward to this too, just like she has. It's easier for us. The money stops after this, so it's easier for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a sun rainbow at the end, but for her especially. But so I'm thinking about that, and I do think that identifying in yourself ways that you can balance that sense of grief with some positives, right? So, for example, my workouts have never been more important, right? I'm trying to do
Yes.
little things to show gratitude for other people because, and I'm a big believer in that, right? That
Yes.
when you demonstrate gratitude, it has a self healing effect. Um,
Yes.
so I think being conscious and deliberate about that, right, is going to be so important.
100%. I think especially for teachers,
Yeah.
maybe not so much for parents, but I think for teachers, I think maybe now more than ever, they are feeling like they're expected to have all the answers, right? They're
Amen.
supposed to be really, really,
Yep.
really good now at online learning and
Right.
learning new technologies and delivering instruction in a very, unique way, and
Right.
something that is not something that we've done widespread before now. And then also to be the positive ray of sunshine for your students. And
Yep.
I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to be Eeyore and down in the dumps, but
Let's not
but I
start the
do.
classroom Zoom session with tears. Let's try not to
That's
do
right.
that.
That's right. Let's try not to make the children cry. But I do think it is really important to model healthy emotional reactions,
Yes.
and that's what I think we're all being called to do right now, and that's the same way, it's just a different way of saying, to give yourself permission
Yeah.
to feel the feelings, and to be the human being that you are in this moment. And it's okay to tell your students or your kids at home that you're having a hard day, and that this is, that this is hard for you. What I try to suggest people do is to, when you do that, to counteract it with something, to also kind of say something that you find that's positive that's
Sure.
coming out of this.
Sure.
There are so many amazing things that are coming out of this collective worldwide experience. And I don't know one person who isn't kind of grabbing onto those things when
Absolutely.
they see them and searching them out on the internet. And it's so lovely the way people are kind of spreading that joy and all of that good news. But to kind of to balance that out. But I do really want adults to hear this, that it's okay for you to have a bad day, and it's okay for you to not have all the answers,
Yeah.
and to not, to just, kind of be making your way through this in a very human way.
Yeah.
And I think that when we as adults model kind of healthy emotional reactions, it gives kids permission to have healthy emotional reactions.
Yeah.
And I think there are some aspects of this situation where kids are coping better than we are.
Yeah.
Certainly the technology
Oh gosh,
piece,
yeah.
that, thank God we all have them around to consult with us.
Exactly.
Those of us who are lucky enough to have kids still living at home, it is nice to have them, as your tech support. But it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And I really, really want adults too to be reaching out to their support systems. If that lasts for, a week or more, or you just find yourself, you just can't quite get out of that slump, please try to reach out to your support system and help yourself. Because as we know, if we can't help ourselves, we're not going to be helpful to the people who rely on us.
And that's a great flash forward, because I am hoping either next week or the week after to be doing an episode with some folks who work in that arena, and it's going to be a quick episode like this one in order to give resources, right? Whether you're a teen or an adult, and to give some specific resources. But I want to dig now into, you started by talking about ways that teachers can begin, at least by modeling and being transparent. That's my interpretation for kids about their emotional, right, response to the circumstances. And we know that, my experience with teachers is that we have a spectrum of folks some who are more inclined to do that naturally anyway, others who have probably kind of always either intentionally kind of hung their hat on, or it's just the way they are, the person they are, that they don't, right? Every day they come in with the exact same demeanor, exact same thing, and I'm going to give her a shout out. It's going to surprise her, but I'll tag her in the post of this. But a teacher that I can think of off the top of my head, Michelle Hazeltine. I can think of a lot of wonderful teachers, by the way, but she's a teacher I worked with back in my middle school days. And the only thing I know all about her teaching from that, and what I know in the years since is what I see on Facebook, because I follow her on both Facebook and Instagram. And Michelle has always been someone who talks with an emotional voice with kids. And that doesn't mean like cries every day. That means that she is open about, gosh, it's Monday and it's raining. It's kind of a drag. And, this is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Right. And likewise, it's Wednesday and it's beautiful outside. So it's the full gamut, right?
Spectrum.
It's not one, like you said, it's not Eeyore every day, but it's not so sunshine every day that it can't possibly be real. And so I think for teachers who don't usually do that, that hasn't been who they are as a teacher in the past, it's going to be harder now, but more important than ever. So let's build on that. What are some very kind of specific things you can think of that teachers can do in the times that they're going to be interacting with kids, whether that's through a platform like Zoom, a virtual platform, or whether it's in writing through emails or Google Classroom or whatever it is? What are you thinking?
So first of all, I just want to say I would love for you to shout out Michelle, because her you matter, stuff with her students literally is.
I hope
just
everybody
some of the
listening
best.
follows Michelle now, because I'll put her contact in the information. But
she just does such an amazing job of connecting with her kids and making them know that they matter. So one of the things that I think it's important to do is to just give, and this will depend on the developmental age.
Sure.
So for early elementary teachers, this is going to look a little different, but certainly for the middle and high school kids, especially high school kids, I do think it's a good idea to do a little touch base with everybody and let people go around and just say what they're doing. And it's not necessarily a sharing circle, because kids don't necessarily feel comfortable doing that either sometimes, but just let kids talk about how they're spending their time and what they're doing with their day and what's going on in their daily lives now that things look so different. And maybe do that thing that we used to do when our kids were small at the dinner table, which is give me your big plus for the day and give me your biggest challenge of the day, and kind of give kids an opportunity to share, and let them do that. And adults, by all means, kind of participate in that. And also give kids, permission not to participate if they don't feel like sharing. That's okay too. What I do want to say right out of the gate is be very careful about checking on your your strong kids, right? Yes. Those of us who are over functioning, I'm looking at you, Janice. We are doers.
Not of what you speak of.
Yeah. So those of us who are over functioners, we tend to just barrel on through. We're problem solvers, we're doers, and kids, we were like that when we were that age, and that's why we grew up into, adults that do that same thing. Yeah. And so when you've got kids who are kind of quiet and you think that they're just doing their thing and getting their assignments in and attending all the online classes and doing all of that, just make sure you're checking in with them, because a lot of those kids are really struggling and they have a harder time kind of coping sometimes, simply because for all the reasons that we do as adults, right? It's hard to sometimes it can be very scary to admit that I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm anxious.
Yeah.
When we start to take our foot off the gas a little bit, things can get a little nerve-wracking for overfunctioners. So,
and we might need to do that, Christine, really quickly, one-on-one, right? Like I think
yes,
those kids in that circle you described are going to be like, I'm fine, right? So those are the ones you're going to have to reach out to one-on-one.
100%. My daughter shared with me this Twitter, kind of chain or whatever. I don't know what you call it. I'm not on Twitter very often, but it's
called a chat. It's a Twitter chat. Yeah.
It's a Twitter chat. It was one where it was like multiple, kind of installments, but it ends up being it went kind of viral, but it ended up being a professor from her university, in which she was talking about how she was started the process of doing individual check-ins with her students, because some of them were looking pretty okay in class, in their online classes, and turns out they were dealing with all sorts of crazy stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so I do think it is very, very critical to even initiate, if you have that type of relationship with your students,
absolutely, do
it, and you feel comfortable doing that.
Sure.
You make a good point. Some people feel more comfortable than others, but please don't hesitate to do that. And I am going to get on my soapbox for just
go for it.
What I really would love to see everybody do is take your foot off the gas of the achievement race.
Yeah.
Our race to high achievement in this culture is toxic.
Yeah.
And my client load is absolutely chock full of kids who are in a very dire place because of it. And what I really hope, I am just going to, the curriculum folks may shoot me down for this, but I'm giving everybody permission to take your foot off the gas of the achievement. We are in a space right now where that is literally, in my opinion, the last thing that we need to be worrying about. Sure. And I know we've got to get kids to finish learning, and I know there's still some curriculum left to teach in this school year. And I don't want to minimize the importance of that piece, but at the same time, I really would love for us all to collectively be taking a very hard look at that piece of the way we function in education, because it just has gotten to be such a toxic culture for so many of our kids.
Yeah.
Even our high achievers,
yep.
It impacts them. It impacts our kids with learning differences.
Course. Yeah.
Our perfectionist kids,
yep.
It's
how am I a perfectionist in this world? Like it's all, and I think, what I would add to that is, again, and my teacher friends who are listening, if I had my teacher's hat on, I'd be thinking, well, that sounds nice, but until they do, this is what I've been charged with, right? And I get that. And of course, Christine, what you've done is invited yourself back for a longer episode, but we'll get back to that. But for today's purposes, for now, I'll say this, that, I think with my teacher's hat on, then what I would say is, what are the opportunities we have for social emotional learning and well-being between now and June that we wouldn't have if you were in your regular classroom, because you wouldn't feel like you could, right? So I'm thinking about things that you can do once a week in your distance learning experience with kids, a couple of times a week, whatever it is, that you might never dream of doing in your classroom, right? Because maybe you'd be worried about what people think, or maybe you don't feel like you have the time, or whatever it is. And it ties to Christine's point about taking our foot off the gas, because here's what we know. And I think I said this to Christine as we were launching, that, and I may have said this in another wrap up of a video, so you'll hear it again. But, I was listening to Arnie Duncan talk last week, and he was talking about this exact thing, that, we got to do A, B, C, D, and E, F. Sure. But if we don't take care of kids' social emotional needs right now, none of it matters. Like nothing else we do is going to matter. We can feel really good about, we taught it, right? And we provided the packets or whatever it is, which is incredible that teachers and leaders are all making this happen right now. But it will mean nothing if we're not taking care of them, from a social emotional level. So what are some other things we can think of that teachers could do?
Well, I think that's a bit of a tougher question, mostly because, I think sometimes everyone has a different comfort level about, kind of how to present quote unquote lessons and such like that. But I think the name of the game right now is to just figure out ways to connect in a one-to-one way with every student that you have.
Yeah.
And to, kind of play around with that part of your role in their life right now, in terms of asking them personal questions. I think sometimes in the classroom, we are so busy, kind of getting through what we know we need to get through, especially this time in the school year. I feel like you poor teachers feel like you probably ran into a brick wall because like in March, like you guys are in crunch time. Like you're planning out every second of your day to get through your curriculum before your testing begins and all of the stuff that you've got to get in, to this time of the school year. It's so hectic for everybody. And you just had the rug totally taken right out from underneath you. So you wouldn't even have time to think about this kind of stuff at this time in the school year without question, but just to really kind of ask them personal questions about what's going on in your life. Like, how is it going for you? And start to relate to them in a way that you maybe don't do normally. Share more of your own personal information and experience with kids, obviously to the extent that you feel comfortable, but that kind of personal sharing is such a powerful tool. In any sort of, kind of relationship where you're trying to kind of engage in even a quasi therapeutic way with another person. It really does help to kind of take that dynamic of teacher student and have it become a little bit grayer, to be honest, and have that be a little bit more of a personal kind of experience for kids. Because again, one of the main things to always think about with kids is how do I model the type of interaction or behavior that I'm looking for, and kind of serve as the model for that. And, to kind of engage with, play around with engaging with kids in a way that is maybe outside of what you normally would do.
No, I love that. And I might add to that as far as the how you engage them. I would encourage, for example, if you're trying to really draw out from kids how they're really doing, right? When you ask kids how they're doing, their answer is fine, just like adults, right? Or okay, or a grunt, or whatever version of it is, right? So instead, I might specifically say to them, what's one thing you're struggling with right now? I wouldn't ask them what they're struggling with COVID-19. I would just ask, what's one thing you're struggling with right now? Likewise, I might then say, so what's one thing that is new in your life now that you like, right? So as a way to get both ends of the spectrum. And I really appreciate your focus on that individual one-to-one. And I'm thinking to myself, if I were an elementary teacher with 30 kids in my class, could I call 5 kids, 5 homes a day, right? And depending on how young they are, maybe the first part of the conversation is with the parents and the second part is with the kiddo, right? But the conversation with the parent, especially at that elementary level, is so critical because I might ask a question like, what do you guys need? You know what I mean? Are you okay? But they're going to say yes. What do you need? Because we have families out there right now who need things that they would have never needed 2 months ago, right? And that's not to say that you as a teacher are going to be like, great, I have a magic wand, here it is. But more that you can then share that information with your school leader, who as a school team you guys can be thinking about, here are the needs that we're experiencing, what now can we do about that collectively, right? Not for an individual teacher to solve. If I am a middle or high school teacher and in the traditional model I have 130 kids, right, then maybe I'm going to work with my grade level team or my department team and we're going to say, all right, let's break them up, right? We're all going to call X number of kids, but no high schooler, quite frankly, wants to be called by all 6 of his or her teachers, right? But if there's one person who's kind of the point, right, who's calling, Johnny Smith on behalf of everybody, then it feels more natural and it feels like you're still going to be able to kind of get at the same kinds of things.
100%. I think that's an amazing suggestion. And I think too, especially for those middle and high school teachers, if you've got an established good relationship with a
Yes.
kid, I don't care if they're on your caseload in your
Yep.
classroom or
Yep.
not, we all know that that's how that works. Sometimes kids and teachers develop these amazing relationships in buildings, and then that kid goes on your list to
Yep.
call. And I would add, I know that we all don't have access to Zoom. I think Zoom is offering, kind of free services to school systems and teachers and educators. But if you can make that a FaceTime call
Absolutely.
or make that a Zoom face call,
Yep.
it makes the world of difference.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be able to then read some body language and really kind of, get beyond the grunting and the
Yep.
one word,
Right.
the one word
Exactly.
responses.
Yeah.
And I do feel like with parents too, you make a very good point, even if it's just like, all right, do we need to kind of develop a paper towel and toilet paper, kind of consortium in our school community,
Yeah, absolutely.
so that people can, if I have extra, I can,
I can share
put it,
Exactly.
all of those things are just kind of resources where, people, you never know what people are experiencing. And I serve on the board of a hunger charity here in our county, and just the number of families that are now seeking assistance just due to food insecurity is growing exponentially, and I think that's something that is hard to admit and hard to reach out to people. So to the extent that each school building can kind of serve as its little kind of pillar,
a little community
of strength,
hub, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love that
Yeah.
as a pillar of strength. And I am thinking, I'm so glad you said that, because what we have to be careful about is making assumptions about who we think will need help and who we think won't. To your point
Yeah.
about, the high achieving kid, we might think is okay. And yet, from your practice alone, I'm sure we could probably give her a nice, shocking percentage of the ones who aren't. But likewise with families, right? Because they live in the nice house in that nice neighborhood doesn't mean they weren't living paycheck to paycheck, and doesn't mean they don't know where the food's coming from next week, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I think that check-in across the board is really important. And then I'm thinking about teachers like, okay, you have X amount of time with kids a week, however you guys are doing it, everybody's doing it differently. But I might think about some of the stuff that I'm doing for my own self-care, right? So for example, I did a live video last week on Facebook about, if you're like me and you're sitting a lot more than usual, here's what you can do at your desk to exercise, right? So spend 5 minutes with your kids saying, gosh, if you're sitting in the same spot, even if it's lounging in your bed, right? You can do some leg lifts, you can do some shoulder stretches, you can do some whatever, for example. I think it'd be incredible if you spent 10 minutes and said, anybody do yoga? Okay, we're going to do a couple of yoga stretches, right? And you don't have to be an expert on yoga to do that. But we know those kinds of things are good to help kids self-regulate, right? And a big part of where they start to feel a loss of control is when they're moving from being kind of in a regulated state to an unregulated state, right? They're kind of moving up the crisis cycle, if you will. So things that you can do, especially physically, right? You could even challenge your kids and say, look, I want you for class today, for 15 minutes of it, you're going to go for a walk in your community. And when you come back, you're going to tell us 3 things that you saw, or whatever it is.
100%.
So those are the kinds of concrete things I think that, I would encourage teachers to think about. It doesn't have to be any of those, but things like that, where you're engaging with them physically, and you're encouraging them to engage in self-care. Because in my mind, especially from a distance perspective, that's probably one of the best things you can do to help them, to help take care of them from a social emotional perspective. Anything that you would add to that, Christine?
Not at all. No. And I for elementary school teachers, you could just do a whole like PE situation. I have this vision of like a scatterbox of kids all wiggling and playing music loud, and I love it.
For your older kids, I'm thinking, and again, it all depends, and sometimes it takes them a hot minute to let down their guard, but it could even be, all right, keeping it clean. The person, you can have 2 minutes to do some rap you created, or tell us about the funniest TikTok video you saw, or do a quick dance, or whatever it is. Now, we have to be willing to put ourselves out there first, right? Obviously, we have to be willing to do the same. It's the thing we love about Michelle, who we talked about earlier, because she always goes first, right? But those are the kinds of things I think that from a teacher perspective that you don't need permission to do. If you are really worried about time, they can be, reciting some poem or whatever it is while they're doing it, right? Like you can double up. But again, circling back to that point, and then Christine, I'm going to turn it to you for the last word of, if we don't acknowledge that all of them are struggling in some way and to different degrees, some maybe very little and some all the way to, the worst that we could imagine. But they all are in some way. And so if you're going to be a person now who's going to have the time with them that's designated, and, and their parents are going to, darn it, make sure they sit there and they do it, right? Then how can you take advantage of that to really play a big role in their social emotional learning in a way that maybe you just never have had the opportunity to before? All right, Christine, last word. What's the last thing you want to leave folks with to be thinking about?
I just want to remind people that, to just treat this like a collective grief experience, and to take as good and compassionate care of yourself as you're thinking about taking of your students.
Yeah.
And to just encourage everybody to think out of the box and how they can be connecting with kids one-on-one. And now that we have the time to be able to kind of do that, take advantage of it. And hopefully that's something that we can, kind of take with us into our new normal when we, start to transition back to what things are going to look like in the future. I think there are some lovely nuggets that are coming out of this, and learning how to connect with each other, and stay connected with each other in these types of circumstances, just brings all of our humanity to the surface. And it really just makes us realize that we are all so very much the same.
Yeah.
And so if it's something that you would need, then assume that it's something that your kids would need too.
That's it. I love that. And if you're not doing it already, especially my teacher friends, write it down. The ahas that you're having right now, write them down. Share them in the comments of this video, or this recording rather, because we're going to have to remember all this, right? So that we can really piece together that new normal. Christine, you're awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.